Hi everybody, this is week 47 of Matthew's Movie Mentions. So this is the films that I watched in the week up to November 26th. We have a lot of films to get through. They are all, I think, all new films that I had not seen before, so I am on that chase to get to 365 new films of the year. This week I'm going to be discussing 8.5, Dirty Computer, Morvern Callar, I Am Love, The Protagonists, Red Lights, This Is the Life, Tokyo Story, A Streetcar Named Desire, The Last Man on Earth, The Red Shoes, Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, Moonlight, Tamara Drew, The Hurt Locker, Suspiria, Platoon, You Were Never Really Here, and Miracle on 34th Street. So, Fellini's 8.5, a film that I probably should have seen a very long time ago. It gets referenced so often by many different people. I really enjoyed the way that the visuals were really interesting throughout this. It had a sort of quasi-fantastical dreamlike state, and the performances themselves felt very natural. These were people who were very comfortable with what they were doing. But more than that, I think I really enjoyed the interplay of languages. The fact that you had different languages going on all the time and that there was lots of wordplay within that. The dialogue was fast-paced and interesting. I think that, for me, more than anything else, helped make it a really gripping film. Dirty Computer is Janelle Monae's emotion picture that was in support of her latest album. Really intriguing, I think. There's a sort of core story about a totalitarian future that's reminiscent of a lot of other films we've seen, and the sort of minor narrative within that, it doesn't feel too different, or there's not much to it, so it doesn't offer a huge amount as a film. But the fact it then goes into these sort of dreamlike cutaways or memories that are videos for some of the songs off the album, they really helped make it actually quite engrossing and quite fun to watch. It just all worked. It came together really, really well. Morvern Callar is me trying to watch more of Lynn Ramsay's early films, and I was pleased to find something that had Samantha Morton in it too. It's a bit more quiet than films I normally watch. The core was oddly satisfying, but it was a very small film that didn't give you much outside of a few things that were seen on screen. It was, a really interesting watch, but not something I would normally go to. I Am Love, Tilda Swinton, she impresses me more every time I see her in a different role. In this one, she is a Russian matriarch, but of an Italian family. And there's a moment in this where she's spending a conversation pretending like she can't understand what two people are saying to each other as they talk in English, because she's a Russian speaker who speaks in Italian for the film, even though she's an English actress. The film itself was enticing. It had really good performances, but you can't help but watch Tilda Swinton every time she's on screen. The Protagonists is a really unusual film. It was effectively doing a sort of behind-the-scenes making-of documentary, but was also the documentary itself. I think the end piece wasn't as gripping as the idea sounded, but I did appreciate the idea. It was an interesting thing, and very clearly a sort of very early project from Luca Guadagnino, who is and will become a great director. Red Lights, Sigourney Weaver as a paranormal investigator. It sounded great, and the film was good. It had some quite good, interesting stuff going on, but I feel like the ending let it down. It sort of gave up one of the core tenets it worked on about everything being a scientifically explainable thing, and then just went to a fantastical place. So for me, it was a letdown. This Is the Life was less of a documentary, more of a retrospective. I hadn't heard of the club that is the subject of this before, and by the end of it, I was really pleased to know its story and know some of the sort of principles involved in it. So a good, interesting watch if you see it on Netflix or something. Tokyo Story is Japanese dramas about ordinary people are always fascinating. They do this sort of film so well. They're never melodramatic, but just really honest. This was a really well-delivered film. It all about the sort of change of generations and children who have grown up and moved away, and the way that post-war Japan was already becoming centered around just a few cities rather than people living spread out across the country. A Streetcar Named Desire, I knew some of the story already, but I'd never actually seen it. It's dramatic, it's tense, it's ultimately quite sad in a number of ways, but I think it definitely needs probably some good editing, probably some changes for a better delivery in as a more modern story. Some of this felt fairly archaic at times. Last Man on Earth is Vincent Price in a story that I hear is based on I Am Legend. It's not a good film. It's very poorly done at times. It's very hard to buy into the sort of premise of it and what's going on. The Red Shoes, I thoroughly loved. It was really good. It loses a little bit for me because at times it forgets that it's supposed to be about people delivering a performance on a stage, and they're basically performing for the cinema and using cinematic effects that wouldn't actually happen if you were watching it live. But the story, really good. The dancing was just phenomenal. And you could feel a real desire from all the main characters in this they wanted to be seen or heard on stage, and that was what was their sort of driving ambition in life. Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, I watched as a really random selection, it's supposed to be a good film from 1988, and I was still blown away by how good it was. This was incredibly funny. I loved how it had a lot of ridiculous elements, but it was still, within them, contained some very human moments and human drama. It was, really, really good film. That is one to find if you can. Moonlight has been on the list all year. I'm glad I finally got around to watching it. It's not quite the film that I'd heard it referred to as and how I'd heard it talked up by a number of people. I can see what they're doing by the end of the film and the final shot, but for me it robs a little bit of the emotion of what we've gone through with this character. Tamara Drew seemed like it would be a great Saturday night film about life in an English country village. It almost was, but there's a point two-thirds of the way through where the main character does something that we found pretty unbelievable, very disappointing. For us, that just derailed the rest of the film from there on out. The Hurt Locker, I loved Jeremy Renner in this. He was so intense and gripping every time he was on screen as soon as he came into the story. The rest of the cast, I don't think quite get to his level of delivery, and I think the film spends a long time not actually sure whose story it's going to be. We're following a lot of different characters and a lot of different things. But that is a little baffling to me because at the very end of it, we know whose story it's in because one character gets a conclusion. So I don't know why we didn't follow them more closely throughout. A very good film, very gripping, without necessarily being pro or anti-war, which is not always an easy thing to do when you're talking about people in such tense situations. Suspiria, I had to watch it, but seeing it was available on one of the channels. It's supposed to be such a classic, so I thought I should definitely watch it. The remake that's just come out looks really interesting, and this is another film that I think I can understand why it's a favourite for many people and why it's something they can refer to as being so great, because the visual elements, the auditory elements are striking, they bombard you throughout. But the story's pretty thin, and most of the characters are very poorly written, so it is just down to the sound and the visuals. Platoon, dramatic and tense. I think I ended up a little bit annoyed that it tried to sneak in a bit of a Hollywood ending whilst also being gritty and horrid. It tries to be... This is why it was so different to Hurt Locker. It tries to denounce the war and be very anti-war and about how terrible people do terrible things, but it doesn't quite vilify the pro-war elements of it enough for me to go, yes, this is a very good anti-war film. You Were Never Really Here. I think I need to watch again to really take it in. It's so quiet, and you really have to look out for what the characters are going through, that on this first viewing I came away a bit unfulfilled, almost like there's not enough there. But I think it's a film that familiarity will help with and allow you to take more from it. And Miracle on 34th Street, for me, what kept the film going was the ambiguity over whether Chris is really Father Christmas. I think they did that really well about, actually, we're not sure whether he is just an old man or whether this is a sort of fantasy element. There are things that don't work as well in this. It's not quite the film that perhaps it once was again in the modern era, but the performance of Maureen O'Hara, alongside some really good writing for the main character of Doris, they really do help keep the film going. My recommendation this week is Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. I did not expect this to be as funny as it was, and it did a sort of slapstick or farcical comedy so well. It was really impressive, much better than some others I've seen that tried to do the same sort of thing. There were interesting characters, and it had an absolute non-stop pace. I could not tear myself away from this, so I loved every moment of this film. So we're on this chase to get to 365 new films, down to about a film and a half a day that I'd have to watch on average. So again, I think it's probably doable. I just need to keep my foot on the accelerator and we will get there. So I'm going to speak to everyone next week for week 48.